It began with a body in the woods. No wounds, no blood, just a smile carved into its face. As the detective digs deeper, he realizes the killer isn't hiding. He's waiting. You didn't like the story, or subscribe. Do I need to send the ghost to your house myself? The rain had started 3 days ago, and it hadn't let up since. Detective Rayan sat behind the wheel of a dull grey sedan, his eyes fixed on the wipers as they pushed sheets of water across the windshield. The clock on the dash blinked. 2:14. Empty next to him, Kellen rubbed sleep from his eyes and reached for a thermos. "You sure this is the place?" he muttered. Rayan nodded. Dispatch said the call came from inside the house. A woman screaming, then silence, then the line went dead. Before them stood the Withrow house, a century-old Victorian wrapped in overgrown ivy and rumour. The porch light flickered like it hadn't been changed in years. There were no signs of movement, no lights in the windows, only the endless cascade of rain. They stepped out into the cold, boots splashing in puddles. The house loomed larger the closer they got. Kellen checked his holster. Rayan adjusted the flashlight in his hand. "Locals say this place is cursed," Kellen mumbled. Rayan didn't respond. His eyes were on the second-floor window, where for a brief second, a silhouette had appeared, tall, unmoving, watching. They climbed the porch steps, the old wood groaning beneath their feet. Rayan knocked once, twice, no answer. He tried the door, unlocked. Inside, the house was deathly still. The key, wallpaper peeled like shed skin, and the air smelled of rot and mold. Every creak of the floorboards felt amplified, like the house was listening. "Police!" Rayan called out. "We received a distress call." A faint sound responded from upstairs, a sob, muffled and shaking. They moved slowly, flashlights, scanning everything. The shattered mirror in the hallway, the blood-stained scarf lying in the corner, the painting of a woman whose eyes seemed to follow them. At the top of the stairs, a door stood ajar. Rayan nudged it open with the barrel of his gun. The room inside was lit only by a flickering candle. On the floor lay a woman, her eyes wide open in terror, mouth agape. Blood pooled beneath her head, spreading slowly into the floorboards. But there was no wound. Kellen crouched beside her. No sign of trauma, no stab wounds, no bruises. It's like she just died from fear. Rayan looked around the room. Something wasn't right. A chair stood facing the window, as though someone had been sitting there. A teacup sat beside it, still warm. "Whoever was here," Rayan said, "they haven't been gone long." Downstairs, something shattered. Both men spun toward the sound. They moved quickly but cautiously, weapons ready. The living room window had cracked outward, glass on the porch. Rain was now pouring into the room, soaking an old rug. But more troubling was what was painted on the wall in red. "This house never forgets." Kellen exhaled slowly. "Is this supposed to be a warning?" Rayan didn't answer. His attention had shifted to the floor beneath the message. There, carved into the wood with something sharp, was a name. Margot Weiler. He took out his notebook. "That's not the woman upstairs. We need to ID her." As Kellen called dispatch, Rayan wandered into the adjoining study. Old newspapers were scattered across the floor, along with journals, torn pages, and strange sketches. In one notebook was a drawing of the house, but something was off. The proportions were wrong. It looked larger on the inside. Rooms that didn't exist. Behind the desk was a photograph in a broken frame. A family, 2 parents, 2 daughters. The mother looked eerily like the dead woman upstairs, only younger. On the back was scribbled, Withrow Lane, 1989, Margot Ruth Alice. Rayan stared at the names. Alice Withrow, he muttered. The house is named after them. Kellen re-entered. The dead woman's name is Ruth Weiler. She's been missing for a year. Her sister Margot died in this house in 1989. Apparent suicide. Which means, Rayan said slowly, the girl in the photo, Alice, could still be alive. They stayed until backup arrived, giving their statements, marking evidence. But neither Rayan nor Kellen could shake the feeling that something about the house was wrong. Not haunted, not cursed, just wrong. That night, as they returned to their motel, Rayan couldn't sleep. The rain outside tapped the window like fingers. He opened his case notes and stared at the photo again. In the background, reflected in the mirror behind the family, was a shadow, human-shaped, watching. It hadn't been there when he first looked. And the scarf, found near the body, it had initials, sewn into it, A.W. Alice Withrow. The next morning, Withrow Lane was sealed off, but the rain hadn't let up. It poured with relentless force, turning the earth around the old house into a soggy pit. The forensics team combed the house while Rayan and Kellen sat in the back of the coroner's van, staring at the lifeless form of Ruth Weiler. Rayan's jaw clenched. A woman missing for a year ends up dead inside her childhood home. No wounds, no signs of struggle, but clear terror on her face. And that house, it's holding something back. Kellen nodded slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. You think the killer's toying with us? Maybe, Rayan replied. But I think this is deeper. This isn't just murder. This feels like memory. They drove to the local archives in the neighboring town of Dale's Hollow, an old library that held the public records and news clippings for the area. Rain tapped the high windows like whispers in Morse code. Margot Withrow, Rayan said to the librarian. She died in 1989. Can you pull her death records? An older woman with tightly pulled grey hair peered over her glasses. Margot Weiler. Yes, we've had a few people look into her before. That house, Withrow Lane, it's been empty since she died. Strange things always surrounded that family. Kellen leaned closer. What kind of strange? The librarian hesitated. Her daughter, Alice. She was never right after Margot's death, always wandering, talking to herself. She disappeared a few years after. No one heard from her again. Some say she left town. Others say she never left the house. She slid a thin manila folder across the counter. Police ruled Margot's death a suicide, but some pages were redacted. Rayan flipped through the brittle papers. One note stood out. A psychological evaluation report from 1987. Patient Margot Weiler. Symptoms: recurrent night terrors, delusions, of a man inside the mirror. Expressed paranoia her house has rearranged itself. Recommendation: 72-hour psychiatric observation. Refused by patient. She claimed the house rearranged itself, Kellen said. Like walls moving? She believed the house changed when no one looked, Rayan said, eyes darkening. They took the folder and drove to the motel, spreading the documents across the desk. Old photographs, a floor plan of the house, journal entries from Margot. It watches me through reflections. I locked the east room. The door never opens unless it wants to. Alice says the house talks to her at night. Rayan traced the floor plan with his finger. There's an east room mentioned here, but we didn't see it at the scene. Which means it's hidden, Kellen said, or not supposed to exist. At 2:43 a.m., they returned to Withrow Lane. Rain soaked their jackets as they let themselves in with a warrant. The house felt colder than before. The scent of rot had deepened. Armed with the floor plan and flashlights, they began exploring. Room by room, they measured the walls, checking for discrepancies, and then in the far hallway behind the staircase, they found it. A seam in the wallpaper, a faint outline of a door long painted over. Rayan pried it open with a crowbar. Dust and mildew exploded into the hallway. Inside was a narrow corridor leading to a room sealed with mirrors, floor to ceiling, wall to wall. Kellen stepped back. What the hell is this? In the center stood a table with items arranged in a strange pattern. Candles, a cracked music box, and a porcelain doll, missing its eyes. Rayan turned, catching a glimpse of himself in one of the mirrors, and froze. 4T. A second, his reflection didn't move with him. Then it smiled. Rayan, Kellen whispered. I think the house is watching us. Rayan backed away from the mirror. This room was built for something. Ritual? Containment? I don't know. Now, the far wall etched into the glass was a map, crude and childlike. It showed the layout of the house, but one floor lower, a basement. There's no basement on any of the blueprints, Rayan said, but that drawing says otherwise. They searched again and found a trap door beneath the study carpet, nailed, shut and covered with dust. It groaned open like it hadn't moved in decades. They descended. The basement wasn't a basement. It was a room, a small round chamber of stone lit faintly by flickering candles already burning when they arrived. The air was heavy, humming with energy. In the center was a single object, a mirror, full length, ornate, its glass black as pitch. Rayan approached slowly. His breath fogged the glass and then the image returned. Himself, only this time he was holding something in his hand. A scarf. The same red scarf found near Ruth's body. He turned to Kellen. This is where it happened. Ruth came here. Something. In this house showed her something, drove her mad. Rayan touched the mirror, and it was warm. They sealed the basement and left, shaken. Outside, Rayan looked back at the house. A light was on in the second-story window. They had turned off every light before leaving. Kellen didn't see it. Only Rayan did. That night, he dreamed of Alice. Not as a child, but as a woman, standing in front of the black mirror, whispering to it. And behind her a shadow, tall and impossibly thin, stepped from the glass and touched her shoulder. The rain had changed. Rayan noticed it the moment he opened his eyes. It no longer sounded like simple droplets against the motel window. It had rhythm now, like quiet footsteps on soaked soil, like someone pacing outside his door. He sat, up sweat, sticking his shirt to his back. Kellen was asleep in the other bed, snoring lightly. The bedside clock read 3:17 a.m. He stood and parted the curtain. No one was there. Only the darkness of Withrow's woods in the distance, black trees bending under the weight of the storm. And in the reflection of the glass, just behind his shoulder, a pale face blinked once and vanished. Rayan didn't speak of it when morning came. They returned to the house at noon. this time with permission to excavate the basement and photograph the entire structure. It was Rayanne's call. He'd called in the favor with a judge he trusted. Something in his gut told him they were dealing with more than just a long, cold case. As they opened the trapdoor to the mirror chamber again, a cold breath of air rolled up the stairs, carrying with it the smell of wet stone and something like sulfur. Kellen led with the flashlight. "This place shouldn't exist," he muttered. Rayanne nodded. "And yet it does." The mirror was still there. Still. Intact. But the reflection was darker than before, distorted like staring into deep water under moonlight. No matter what angle they stood at, their faces never appeared quite right. Rayanne tried to photograph it. The camera froze every time. They decided to search the room. Behind the mirror, hidden in a panel of the wall, was a small lockbox. Inside, a bundle of letters, tied with a rotted blue ribbon. Rayanne untied it carefully. The handwriting was frantic, disjointed. To whoever finds this, the house is not a place, it is a gate. A passage to something old, I don't know what it is. I only know it feeds on secrets. The more you hide, the more it knows you. It listens through mirrors. It watches when you sleep. My name is Alice Withrow. If I am gone, please don't let it out. It lives in reflections. It knows your face. Kellen closed the box slowly. Jesus. Rayanne looked at the final letter. Unlike the others, it was calm, intentionally written. The date, July 13th, 1998. He promised he wouldn't hurt her if I obeyed. But I failed. I'm sorry, Ruth. I couldn't keep him in. He lies in glass, and I am the key. They didn't say much on the drive back to town. The air in the car felt heavier now, like whatever they'd stirred in the basement followed them. Back at the motel, Rayanne reviewed the house blueprints again, now with the basement chamber marked. Something kept bothering him. The proportions of the house still didn't match up. There was space missing. "Kellen," he said suddenly, "we're still missing a room." Kellen looked up from his laptop. "You sure?" "Positive. There's another hidden area on the second floor, right side of the hall." They drove back just before dusk. By now the rain had become a permanent part of their world. Endless, cold, the kind that soaked through jackets and into bone. Inside the house they measured again, knocking gently. On the walls, hollow, solid, solid, hollow. Rayanne tapped twice near a cracked oil painting. The wall echoed back softly. He pressed hard and a section gave way. Behind it, a narrow crawl space leading to a sealed wooden door, scratched deep with marks that looked like fingernails. On the floor in front of it, a child's shoe. Rayanne hesitated. This is where Alice hid her secrets. He forced the door open. Inside was a child's bedroom untouched by time. Dolls lined the shelves. A small bed sat in the corner. The walls were scribbled with crayon drawings, but something was wrong with the drawings. Every one of them depicted the same figure, tall, faceless, arms too long, standing in a corner. Kellen knelt down. Some of these dates go back to when Alice was a child, but others are newer. He pointed at one, July 10th, just 3 days before Ruth was found dead. Rayanne turned to the dollhouse beside the bed. It was a perfect replica of the Withrow home. The basement was there, the mirror room, even the new crawl space they'd just discovered. But there was something else. A black dot beneath the house, a space even lower than the mirror chamber. "There's something beneath the foundation," Rayanne whispered. They returned to the basement. Rayanne paced along the far wall and found it, a faint seam in the stone shaped like a trapdoor cemented over. This one hadn't been touched in decades. Kellen shook his head. "Rayanne, are we sure we want to open this?" Rayanne stared at the wall. "I don't think it's about what we want anymore." They brought in a concrete saw the next morning and cut through the slab. What lay beneath wasn't another room. It was a shaft, narrow, vertical, with an old ladder descending into darkness. Rayanne volunteered to go down first. The climb was short, maybe 20 feet. The space below opened into a chamber made of old brick and dirt, like an abandoned cistern. The air was thick, humid and absolutely silent. In the center stood a second mirror, only this one was shattered. The frame was black iron, warped from heat. And lying at the base of the frame was a skeleton, small, frail, curled in a fetal position. Next to it was a rusted locket, still intact. Rayanne opened it. Inside, a photo of two girls, Alice and Ruth, sisters. Kellen's voice echoed from above. "You see anything?" Rayanne didn't answer. Not yet. Because there was something else in the chamber. Carved into every inch of the walls were words, etched over and over in a looping childlike hand. "He lives here. He lives here. He lives here." Rayanne looked up, and for a split second in the broken mirror's fractured shards, he saw something standing behind him, tall, watching. He spun around. Nothing. But on the floor, beside the bones, something was scrawled in blood. "She is still alive." Rayanne didn't speak for a long time. He climbed slowly out of the dark chamber, covered in the dust of decades, his hands still trembling from what he'd seen. Kellen was pacing near the cracked mirror when he re-emerged. "You're pale," Kellen said. "What was down there?" Rayanne didn't answer immediately. He stood upright, blinked against the sudden light and held out the locket. "Alice didn't just die down there," Rayanne said. "She was buried, sealed in with it." "It?" Rayanne nodded toward the mirror. "The thing she was trying to trap." Kellen examined the locket, silent for a beat. "You said, 'She is still alive' was written down there?" Rayanne nodded again. "But that's impossible," Kellen muttered, "if those are Alice's bones." Rayanne stepped away from the basement. "I don't think it was about Alice. I think the message was about Ruth." Kellen blinked. "But Ruth's body was—" "I know what the coroner said. I know what the police ruled it as. But what if they were wrong?" "Wrong about what?" "That the body they found wasn't Ruth at all." They returned to the motel. Rain still fell. Thunder rolled constantly now in the distance, like a war being fought just beyond the hills. Something about Withrow seemed to bend under the pressure of the storm, as if the town itself was trying to keep something down, something very old, very hungry. Rayanne barely slept. He kept seeing the mirror's reflection, the warped thing behind him, featureless like melted skin stretched across a frame. It reminded him of something, a painting, one he saw years ago while visiting a cult museum in New Mexico. It was labeled only "The Watcher Beyond the Gate." In the painting, the figure was featureless, but had eyes carved all over its body. And behind it, etched in Latin, "Truth opens the way, lies invite him in." The next morning they visited the Withrow Town archives. Rayan wanted to look deeper into the family's past, find any record of Alice or Ruth that hadn't been scrubbed from public memory. The town librarian, a woman in her 60s named Elaine, greeted them politely and led them to the restricted section. "I remember Alice," she said suddenly as they walked. "Quiet girl, always alone." Ruth was the opposite, loud, sharp, too sharp maybe. "Do you remember when Ruth died?" Rayan asked. Elaine gave a strange smile. "They said she fell down the stairs, but no one ever asked why she was bleeding before she fell." That silence lingered as they moved into the dusty room lined with old newspaper clippings and fragile birth records. Kellen found it first. A newspaper dated July 14th, 1998, the day after Ruth's supposed death. The front page headline, "Girls. Body found in Withrow home." Below it was a photograph of the scene, paramedics carrying a stretcher, but there was something odd in the photo. Behind the medics, standing in the shadows of the front porch, was a figure, not Alice, not a neighbor, someone else, a man. Rayan squinted. The face was mostly obscured, but the posture, the height, was unsettling. He looked like he was watching everything unfold, like it was a performance meant just for him. Kellen flipped to the next page. Buried in the obituaries, Alice Withrow, 12, presumed missing. Not dead, not found, presumed missing. "What the hell?" Kellen whispered. "The body they found, it wasn't identified." Rayan sat down slowly. "They just assumed it was Ruth. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe the body wasn't either of them." Kellen looked up sharply. "Wait, what if someone else died in that house?" They returned to the Withrow house once more. The air was heavier now. The storm no longer felt natural. It was like it had parked itself above Withrow and refused to leave. The mirror was still intact. So was the shattered one beneath the foundation. Rayan pulled out his notepad. "Alice tried to lock this thing in," he said, "and when she failed, someone else used her. Used her. The locket, the letters, they weren't left as warnings, they were bait." Kellen turned. "What do you mean?" Rayan pointed to the scratches on the wall, the old crayon drawings. "This house was a vessel for whatever it is, but it needs an anchor, someone to keep it tied to this world." Kellen paled. "You think Alice became that anchor?" Rayan nodded. "And now it's looking for another." That night, Rayan couldn't sleep. So he reviewed the photos they had taken earlier, scanning for anything odd. And then he saw it. A reflection in the motel room mirror behind Kellen. Not Rayan, not Kellen. Something taller, thinner, watching. He froze the frame. Its head was slightly turned. Its arms looked longer than a human should. And its eyes, black pits, were fixed directly on the camera lens. He didn't tell Kellen. Instead, he grabbed his keys. There was one place left they hadn't searched, the Withrow family grave. It was hidden near the edge of town, in a grove of birch trees where few locals dared to go. Rayan had found a land deed in the archive earlier, and its coordinates led here. The graves were old, covered in moss and leaves, but only 3 markers stood out. Joseph Withrow, 1950-1997. Helen Withrow, 1952-1990. Ruth Withrow, 1986-1998. No mention of Alice. But behind the graves, half buried in mud, was a smaller headstone. No name, just a carving of a mirror, and the words "Do not unseal." Rayanne knelt down. There were scratch marks all around the stone, like someone or something had tried to claw their way out. Back at the motel, Kellen was sitting at the edge of his bed when Rayanne returned. "I had a dream," he said without turning. "She was in the room." Rayanne paused. "Who?" Kellen looked up. "Ruth." Rayanne felt a chill move through the room. "She said we're close, but that we're missing the truth, that the lie is what lets it stay." Rayanne sat across from him, pulling out the locket again. Inside were the two girls. One smiled. One didn't. "What if Ruth never died?" Rayanne whispered. "What if she became something else?" Kellen looked at him. "Then who did we find in that basement?" Rayanne held up the locket. "I think we're about to find out." The wind had shifted. Outside the motel, the rain no longer fell with rhythm. It scattered in sudden gusts like it was being pushed by something unseen. The trees surrounding Withrow swayed in unison, but without sound. Just a soft, eerie pressure in the air. Inside, Rayanne stared at the ceiling as thunder rolled once more. He didn't need sleep. He needed answers. The locket lay open on the table beside him. The photo inside, Ruth and Alice side by side, looked different now. The longer he stared, the more wrong it seemed, as if the girls weren't looking at the camera but past it, as if they knew something was watching from behind. Rayanne grabbed his notebook, flipped to the first page. Joseph Withrow dies mysteriously in 1997. Helen, his wife, had died earlier, drowned supposedly. Ruth is found dead in 1998. Alice goes missing. He circled Alice's name. But what if the records were planted? What if Alice never went missing? What if she became something untraceable? Rayanne rose and stepped outside. Kellen was already waiting by the car, hood up, cigarette forgotten between his fingers. "You feel it too?" he asked without turning. Rayanne nodded. "Everything's different now. Where are we going?" Rayanne climbed into the passenger seat. "The police station. I want to see the original case files from the Withrow case, not the press statements, the real ones." The Withrow County Sheriff's Office was small, more of a converted house than a government building. Inside, a sleepy deputy looked up at them with little enthusiasm. "You boys again?" Rayanne flashed a smile. "We're here for the truth about the Withrow murders." The deputy sighed and waved toward the records room. "Be my guest. Nothing in there but bad dreams." Rayanne and Kellen slipped inside the dim back room, filing cabinets towering around them like silent witnesses. Rayanne flipped open a drawer marked 1998. Cold cases. And there it was. Withrow Ruth. Death investigation. He opened the folder. Photos of the body. A teenage girl. Head trauma. Blood on the floor. But no autopsy confirmation. No dental records. No ID matching. Just a note scribbled by the original investigator. Identified by neighbor via clothing and bracelet. No direct family available for confirmation. Rayanne frowned. They never confirmed it was Ruth. Kellen looked over his shoulder. So it could have been Alice. Rayanne shook his head. Or someone else entirely. That's the part that scares me. They kept digging. For hours. until Kellen pulled a smaller file from the back of a drawer, labeled Withrow, Joseph, Death Investigation. Rayanne had never seen it referenced before. He flipped it open. Joseph Withrow had died in bed. Cause of death, heart failure. But scrawled at the bottom in red ink was a note from the responding officer. Eyes were open, mouth stretched in scream, no signs of struggle. Coroner called it natural, didn't feel natural. Rayanne leaned back. They were lying to themselves even then. Kellen tapped the last page. Look at the signature, Rayanne read it aloud. Detective Calvin O'Hara. I've seen that name before, Kellen said. Didn't he resign a month after the case? Rayanne nodded slowly and moved to Oregon, but not before writing a letter to the editor of the local paper. It was never published. I'm guessing you found a copy. Rayanne pulled his phone and tapped his screen. An archived image loaded. A blurry photo of an old typewritten letter. There is something wrong in that house. It's not a case of murder. It's a feeding. It feeds on secrets, on lies, and it knows when you're lying. That's how it chooses. Phew, that's how it gets in. At the bottom, written by hand, I saw it once in the mirror. It wore my face. They left the station in silence. Thunder cracked overhead like a warning. Back at the motel, Rayanne stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at himself. He didn't move, not for minutes, just stared. Then, his reflection blinked. Rayanne hadn't. He stumbled back, slamming the bathroom door shut. What's wrong? Kellen asked, stepping in. Rayanne pointed to the mirror. It blinked. Kellen opened the door. The mirror was still, normal, empty. I think it's watching us, Rayanne whispered. Through reflections. Every mirror we look into, it looks back. Kellen turned and locked eyes with him. Then maybe we should stop looking. The next day they visited Elaine again, the librarian. But the library was closed. They found her home, door open, a kettle boiling on the stove, and a mirror in the hallway, smashed. Rayanne called out, Elaine? Silence, then a faint whisper. She's in the attic. Rayanne turned to Kellen. Did you hear that? Kellen nodded slowly. It sounded like a child, Rayanne finished. They climbed the attic stairs carefully. The boards creaked. The air smelled of old dust and mothballs. Elaine was there. Sitting in a rocking chair, eyes closed, a broken piece of mirror clutched in her hand. Rayanne knelt beside her. Elaine? Her mouth opened. Her eyes stayed shut. They lie, she whispered. So many lies. That's how it got out. That's how it spreads. Through false stories, through changing names. It feeds on twisted memories. Rayanne touched her hand. What is it? Her eyelids fluttered. Its name is forgotten, but its face is yours, she gasped, then fell still. Kellen checked her pulse. She's gone, Rayanne stood. She knew something, but not everything. On the wall of the attic was a photo. Elaine, years ago, standing beside two children, Alice and Ruth. But between them was a third child, a boy. No name, no mention in any file. Rayanne stared. There was a third Withrow child? Kellen squinted. No one ever said anything. Rayanne touched the photo gently, maybe because no one wanted to remember him. That night, Rayanne stood outside the Withrow house again. The air was thick with something wrong. The storm circled the town but hadn't moved on. The house was different now. Every window reflected something that wasn't there. The mirrors inside shimmered even without light, and in the center of the house, in the hallway, was a new message, scratched into the wood. "Thirdborn, never spoken," Rayanne whispered aloud. "He wasn't forgotten, he was erased." He turned to Kellen. "We need to find out who he was, before it's too late." Kellen hesitated. "Too late for what?" Rayanne met his eyes. "To stop it from finding another face to wear." Rain clung to the windows of the Silver Pine police station, like fingers trying to pull something inside. The building had grown quieter in recent days. Officers spoke in hushed tones, if at all. The murder of Elsie Harrow had unearthed a deep, unseen tension in the town, and though arrests had been made and interviews filed, the truth remained elusive. Detective Rayanne sat in his corner office, reviewing crime scene photos for the fourth time that day. The eerie blue hue of the overhead lights reflected off the plastic evidence bags spread across his desk. Blood-stained sheet music. Play a broken metronome. Elsie's favorite scarf torn in half and something else, a feather. Not from a bird. This was handcrafted, painted with crimson ink, its edges burned. Rayanne kept returning to it because it made no sense. It hadn't come from Elsie's clothing or her home. It was placed, intentionally, near her piano stool. Still looking at that? Kellen entered, 2 coffees in hand. His trench coat was soaked, droplets still clinging to his dark hair. Rayanne nodded without looking up. The feather wasn't in the first set of evidence photos. It showed up in the second batch from forensics. You think it was missed the first time or added later? That's the problem, I don't know. Kellen handed him the coffee and dropped into the nearby chair. People are still pointing fingers at Gerald Harrow, but he's a broken man, Rayanne, not a killer. I agree, and the blood under Elsie's fingernails didn't match him, nor the shoe prints in the garden. Kellen took a sip. So we're still looking for a ghost. Rayanne frowned. No. We're looking for someone who knows exactly how to stay invisible. By mid-morning, a call came in from a local librarian, Meredith Quinn, who claimed to have found something concerning in the archives. The library sat on the western edge of town, old and crooked like most of Silver Pine's structures. The heavy rain had soaked its stone exterior, and inside the scent of old paper and mildew mixed with coffee and wood polish. Meredith, a tall woman in her 60s with silver braids and piercing green eyes, led them into a locked section of the library. This was part of the estate donation by the Harrow family, she said, unlocking a glass case. Mostly music history and local journals, but this... She pulled out a thick leather-bound journal. This doesn't belong to any catalogued volume. It was tucked behind a row of Civil War records. Rayanne opened the cover. The name was handwritten. Julian Harrow, 1893. Kellen raised a brow. A Harrow? Meredith nodded. One of Elsie's ancestors, a composer who lived in Silver Pine briefly before disappearing without a trace, never officially declared dead. Rayanne flipped through pages of strange musical notes, symbols drawn in the margins, and increasingly erratic handwriting. Then something caught his eye. The feather calls only once. The silent music must be played before the shadow rises. Kellen leaned closer. What does that even mean? Rayanne didn't answer. His mind had jumped back to the blood-stained sheet music found at the scene. There were bars scratched out, notes added by hand, almost identical markings to the ones in this journal. "We need to see Elsie's music again," Rayan said, "and we need someone who can read these patterns." Later that evening, they brought the journal to Callum Royce, the town's reclusive former symphony conductor, now living alone above the old theatre. Callum was tall, gaunt, and dressed like he had stepped out of a 1940s film noir. He had a strange stillness about him, like he didn't belong to the present. He examined both the journal and Elsie's final composition for a long time before speaking. "This isn't just music," he said. "It's a map." Kellen looked skeptical. "A map to what?" "Patterns, emotions, timing. Some of these phrases don't follow natural time signatures. Look," he tapped a series of overlapping notes. "This sequence matches Gregorian incantation, and this," he flipped to Julian Harrow's journal. "This is a coded variant of a Dies Irae motif." "Meaning?" Rayan pressed. "This isn't written to be performed for people. It's written to be played in places." Rayan and Kellen exchanged glances. Callum continued. "I once heard of a performance like this. In the 1970s. Composer went missing afterward. They said it was part of a ritual to open the veil." Rayan's voice grew cold. "Are you saying Elsie was performing a ritual?" Callum hesitated. "Maybe not willingly, but someone wrote this piece with intent. This kind of intent invites things." "What kind of things?" Kellen asked. Callum didn't answer. That night, Rayan sat alone in his apartment, rain tapping softly at the windows. He stared at the crime board on his wall. Photos, timelines, pins and string, and a creeping thought settled in his mind. Julian Harrow disappeared. His journal was found in the Harrow estate. Elsie had started composing a piece with symbols identical to Julian's, and now she was dead. He called Kellen. "We need to go back to the Harrow house tonight." The Harrow house loomed in darkness, its windows vacant, its walls groaning under the weight of years. The estate had been sealed since the murder, but Rayan used his credentials to bypass the lock. Inside, the smell of old wood and dried flowers lingered. They walked slowly through the drawing room, up the creaking staircase and into Elsie's music room. Rayan turned on his flashlight. The room was just as they'd left it, piano untouched, the metronome broken and still on its side. Her last composition lay half-finished on the music stand, but something was different. The closet door, once sealed, was now open. Kellen stepped inside and pulled the cord to an attic ladder. "This wasn't here before," Rayan nodded. "Let's go." The attic was cold. Dust floated like mist in their flashlight beams. Old boxes, covered furniture, and a piano under a heavy sheet sat quietly in the corner. They lifted the sheet. It was unlike any piano either of them had seen. Hand-carved with symbols inlaid along the wood. The same symbols as the journal, as the sheet music. "Julian's piano," Rayan murmured. Beneath the bench was a hidden compartment. Inside, another feather, identical to the one from the crime scene, and a reel-to-reel audio recorder. Kellen connected it to his phone's portable speaker adapter and pressed play. At first there was only static, then faint breathing. A melody, soft hesitant, then growing frantic. Elsie's voice. "It's happening again." The mirror turned black. I saw him. Behind me. The feather. It's not just a warning. It's a key. Then a sharp, inhuman scream. The recording cut. They stood in silence. Rayenne's voice was barely a whisper. She knew. Kellen turned to him. Knew what? That she wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. Back at the station, Rayenne uploaded the audio and stored the piano feather in a locked drawer. The rain outside had turned into a storm. On his desk was an envelope, no name, no return address. Inside, a photo, black and white, faded. Elsie, in her childhood, with her music teacher. Rayenne turned it over, handwritten. He never left. Only changed faces. He scanned the photo and froze. Because standing behind Elsie, hand on her shoulder, was someone he recognized, Callum Royce. The storm pressed against Silverpine like a suffocating hand. Wind howled through the narrow alleys, rattling old glass panes and stirring curtains in homes where no one dared sleep. Detective Rayenne stood at his office window, rain casting moving shadows across his face, the photo still gripped tightly in his hand. It was impossible. The black and white image clearly showed a young Elsie Harrow, no older than 7, seated at a small piano. Behind her stood a tall, thin man, with a hand resting lightly on her shoulder. His expression was unreadable, but Rayenne knew that face, Callum Royce. But that was the problem. Callum wasn't old enough. He appeared in the photo exactly as he did now, unchanged. Same sunken cheeks, same slicked back hair, same cold, distant eyes. Kellen paced the office, restless. It's not possible. The man in the photo can't be Callum. That picture has to be at least 30 years old. Rayenne didn't respond. Instead, he set the photo on the evidence board and walked to the file cabinet. He pulled Elsie's case folder again and flipped to her childhood records. Teachers, guardians, lessons. There it was. Music instructor, private. No legal name on file, paid in cash. Kellen stared at the note. Who the hell teaches a child without ever giving a name? Rayenne looked back at the photo. Someone who doesn't want to be traced. The next morning, under heavy rain, they returned to Callum's apartment above the abandoned Silverpine Theatre. They knocked. No answer. Kellen tried the handle. Locked. Rayenne pulled out his set of picks and quickly undid the mechanism. The door creaked open into a world of shadows and music. The apartment was dark, heavy with the smell of wax and rotting paper. Sheets of music covered the floor in spirals, like something had exploded from the piano and scattered them. Strange. Symbols were etched onto the walls with charcoal. Some had been carved in. This isn't the home of a grieving artist, Kellen whispered. This is a shrine. Rayenne knelt and picked up one of the pages. It was written in the same hand as Julian Harrow's journal, but the ink was fresh. Callum didn't write these, Rayenne said. Whoever did this has been copying Julian. Kellen examined the sheet more closely. No, wait, look at the corner. A faint marking. J.H. 2024 Rayenne froze. Julian Harrow. Kellen looked at him. He died over 100 years ago. Unless he didn't. They stepped into the bedroom. The bed was neatly made. No signs of a struggle. On the nightstand, a small feather, this one pure black. Beside it, a metronome ticking at a maddeningly fast tempo, and a tape recorder. Ryan pressed play. A distorted voice came through. Only the dissonant can hear the door open. The notes must align. The sacrifice plays the final bar. The tape ended. No name, no instructions. Just a cold, cryptic message. Ryan sat down on the edge of the bed, mind racing. The sacrifice is the victim. The final bar. The death moment. Kellen glanced around. What if this isn't about music? What if it's about timing? Later, they met Meredith, the librarian, again, this time requesting access to town historical records. She led them to the basement, a narrow, musty corridor lined with locked filing cabinets. They spent 2 hours digging until they found it. Silver Pine. Times, 1894. Headline: Music prodigy disappears mid-concert. A photo of Julian Harrow, much younger, but unmistakably the same face as Callum Royce. Julian never vanished, Ryan said slowly. He moved through time. Kellen's brow furrowed. What are you saying? He's a ghost? Not quite. He's something else, something tethered. They found other records, 1920, 1943, 1967, always the same pattern. A music teacher arrives. A young prodigy dies. A feather is left behind. Each time, Julian's image. Is there always the same face, same eyes? Each time he was called something new. Royce, Renard, Helms. He didn't age. He only changed names. Rayanne and Kellen returned to the station, shaken. The rain had not stopped for days. Silver Pines. Streets were nearly flooded. It felt like the town itself was drowning under the weight of its own secrets. A new call came in just before midnight. Another death. This time, a teenager, Clara Jensen, age 16, piano student. Found in her attic, neck snapped, a black feather placed on her lips. When Rayanne and Kellen arrived, the scene mirrored Elsie's. Same pose, same symbols, same sheet music. But one thing was different. On the wall, written in chalk, almost finished. One more performance. Kellen's face paled. He's planning a finale. Rayan turned to him. And I think we know where. The next day, Rayan contacted every surviving member of the Silver Pine Symphony. Many hadn't performed in years. Some were infirm, others retired. But a letter had been mailed to all of them weeks ago, an invitation to a private commemorative performance in the old Silver Pine Theatre. No sender, no details, just a date. This Saturday, midnight. 3 days away. Rayan's voice was cold. He's staging something. A ritual disguised as a concert. Kellen leaned over the desk. Then we stop it before the curtain rises. They spent the next day interviewing former students of Callum Royce. Many refused to speak. Some seemed afraid. One woman, Olivia Mars, now 41, finally agreed. She sat with them in the quiet corner of a bookstore, nervously fidgeting with her scarf. He doesn't age, she said. I swear to you. I was 15 when I studied under him. That was 26 years ago. He looked exactly the same then as he does now. Did he ever mention Julian Harrow? Rayan asked. She shook her head. Not directly. But he called his lessons legacy sessions. Said he was just passing something on. That one day I'd understand. Did you? "I hope I never do," she whispered. Kellen leaned in. "Did he ever give you a feather?" Olivia's eyes filled with tears. She reached into her purse and removed a small black feather, sealed in a plastic bag. "He left this on my pillow the night I quit. I thought it was a threat." Rayanne took it gently. It was a warning. 2 nights before the supposed concert, Rayanne sat alone in the station, studying the symbols from Julian's journal, Elsie's sheet music, and the latest death. Something clicked. It wasn't just music. It was a calendar. Each murder had occurred on the same lunar cycle, new moon phase. The upcoming concert aligned with a rare astronomical event, a lunar eclipse during the new moon, a total blackout, a perfect veil. Rayanne whispered aloud, "The performance isn't for the living. It's for something else." They moved quickly. Kellen gathered a team, officers, medics, and a forensic analyst. They would stage a stakeout around the theater, quietly embedded among the invited musicians. Rayanne called in an old friend, Mara Benning, an audio forensics expert with experience in paranormal resonance. They entered the Silver Pine Theater the night before the event. Dust hung like smoke in the air. The seats were covered in plastic, but the stage was immaculate. Freshly tuned piano, music stands arranged, candles placed precisely along the aisles, a large black feather at center stage. Mara's equipment picked up something strange. "It's humming," she said. "Not mechanical, not electrical. The stage is humming like it's alive." Rayanne stepped onto the wood and felt it, like a heartbeat beneath his feet. "He's already started," he whispered. They hid small transmitters around the building. Cameras, motion sensors, infrared heat mapping. The goal wasn't just to stop the event, it was to capture it. Rayanne left last, locking the doors behind him. Outside, the rain finally began to slow. For the first time in weeks, silence returned to Silver Pine. But it wasn't peace. It was the quiet before the final act. That night, Rayanne dreamed of Elsie. She was seated at the old attic piano, her fingers bleeding, tears running down her face. "He's in the notes," she said softly. He wrote himself into the silence. Rayanne awoke drenched in sweat. His clock blinked. 3:33 a.m. on his nightstand. A black feather, and beneath it, a sheet of music that hadn't been there before. The final movement. The storm returned on the night of the concert, as if nature itself feared what was coming. Heavy clouds cloaked the moon, and the cold wind howled through the narrow streets of Silver Pine. The theater stood still, its century-old sign swaying in the breeze, glowing faintly under a flickering street lamp. The town was asleep, unaware that something ancient was preparing to wake. Detective Rayanne stood across the street, eyes locked on the building. Kellen stood beside him, adjusting the small earpiece they'd all been given. Around the perimeter, 4 officers were hidden in plain sight, in parked cars behind alley corners, and seated as guests inside. Audio surveillance was active. Cameras were hidden in the orchestra pit and balcony. They'd covered every angle. "Time?" Rayanne asked. 11:48, Kellen answered. 12 minutes. Rayanne's hand was resting on the folded sheet of music found in his home. The final movement. He hadn't dared play it. Even reading the notes too long gave him chills, like it reached beyond the paper and brushed something inside his chest. A call came through the comms. It was Mara, the audio expert, whispering from the balcony. "They're arriving," she said. 10 people so far, musicians, no sign of Callum. Inside, the musicians took their seats quietly, each one dressed in black. Most looked confused, even uncomfortable. They hadn't received any further instructions since the original invitation. There was no host, no program, just an empty stage. Then, at exactly midnight, the doors creaked closed behind a tall man in a dark overcoat. Callum Royce. His hair was slicked back, his face paler than usual, eyes distant as if staring through time. In his hand, he held a small black notebook. He walked slowly to the center of the stage and set the book on the piano. With a single motion, he lit each of the candles around him. The flames flickered in unison, casting eerie shadows across the ceiling. Then he spoke, calm and clear. "Tonight we finish what began long ago. Tonight we cross the threshold." Rayanne and Kellen pushed through the doors from the back of the theater, signaling to the officers to hold positions. The room felt wrong, the air thick like pressure building before an explosion. The moment Rayanne stepped inside, the music stands began to vibrate. Callum sat at the piano and placed his fingers gently on the keys. No sheet music in front of him. He didn't need it. He began to play. The first note echoed through the space like a scream held underwater. It wasn't just sound. It was movement. The walls trembled. The shadows flickered unnaturally. Rayan drew his weapon. "Callum! Stop!" Callum didn't look up. His fingers danced, weaving together a melody that felt older than language. Behind him, the notebook on the piano flipped open on its own, pages turning as if guided by invisible hands. Mara's voice came through the earpiece. "Rayanne, the audio's reacting. I'm picking up subharmonic frequencies not possible on a standard piano. It's like something's responding." Rayan moved down the aisle toward the stage. The musicians around him began to sway, not by choice but as if pulled by invisible strings. Their instruments, untouched, began to hum. Some even cried out softly, as though breathing. Kellen took the far side, moving around to the rear of the stage, and then Rayan saw it, a shape forming behind Callum, not solid but felt. A tall figure, cloaked in shadow, standing just beyond the candlelight. Callum's eyes were glassy, distant. Julian Harrow was only the first. "I am the last. I've become the bridge." Rayan aimed at the piano. "End this, or I'll end it. For you." Callum smiled, but not at Rayan, at the shadow behind him. "You can't stop the finale. It's already written." Rayan fired. The bullet struck the edge of the piano, splintering wood. The melody faltered, but only for a moment. Callum kept playing. Now blood dripped from his fingertips onto the keys, but he didn't flinch. His eyes rolled back, and he spoke in a different voice, deeper, guttural, ancient. He demands. The crescendo. Suddenly the audience members stood as one, blank-eyed, possessed. Kellen shouted from behind the stage, "Rayanne, the trapdoor! It's open!" Callum reached the final page of the melody. The music swelled, dark and pulsing. Behind him, the shadow solidified into something skeletal, its arms long and thin like bent branches wrapped in smoke. Rayan leapt onto the stage and tackled Callum from the bench, slamming him to the floor. The piano screamed. The sound was no longer music, but an inhuman screech that cracked 2 of the front windows. Kellen dove for the notebook and ripped it off the piano. The moment he did, the candles extinguished. Darkness swallowed the room. A single breath, long and cold, moved through the theater like death itself arriving. And then, silence. The musicians collapsed to the ground. The instruments fell lifeless. The walls stopped vibrating. Rayanne struck a match, and the flicker of flame revealed Callum unconscious beneath him, bleeding from his eyes. The shadow was gone. The nightmare paused. Back at the station, Callum lay in a cell under heavy sedation. Medical examiners were baffled. His heart rate was normal, but his brain activity resembled someone in deep REM sleep. He wouldn't wake. Kellen sat across from Rayanne in the observation room, watching him through the glass. No ID, no history. Just appeared one day, Kellen said quietly. If he was Julian, if that was the same man, then how did he survive? All these decades? Rayanne shook his head. Maybe he didn't, maybe he died long ago. What we've been chasing is whatever took his place. Kellen nodded slowly. And it needs music, needs performers. Each concert brings it closer. Rayanne opened the black notebook. Inside, the final page was blank. But as he stared at it, ink began to appear, one word, encore. The next day, the town began to breathe again. The rain finally ceased. The clouds parted just enough for a sliver of moonlight to touch the cracked pavement of Main Street. But the calm was deceptive, because something had tasted silver pine, and it wasn't finished. It crept over the rooftops of silver pine, slithering between trees and curling around lampposts. A stillness lay over the town, a kind that came not from peace, but the unbearable silence before something truly terrible. In the heart of that quiet stood the Silver Pine Police Department, its walls holding secrets even it didn't yet understand. Detective. Rayanne hadn't slept. He sat hunched over his desk, lit only by a single lamp. The black notebook lay open in front of him, still turned to the page where one word had appeared in ghostly ink. Encore. No matter how long he stared, the rest of the page remained blank. No melody, no lyrics. Just a single, looming invitation. Kellen entered the office, holding 2 coffees and a small box of pastries. Still nothing from Callum? Rayanne shook his head slowly. He's breathing, he's alive, but he's gone. They transferred him to a secure facility this morning, Kellen said, setting down the coffee. State-run psych unit. Level 4 lockdown, 24-hour watch. Rayanne leaned back in his chair. They won't understand him. They'll poke and scan and prod until something wakes up inside him. Or worse, something comes back for him. Kellen paused, looking at the notebook. You think it's still in town? I don't think it ever left. There was a moment of silence. Rain tapped softly against the window. Then Mara burst into the room, breathless. You both need to come downstairs. Now. Rayanne and Kellen followed her down the dim hallway to the records room, where 3 officers were huddled around a dusty table. Laid out in front of them were a stack of yellowed photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. Mara spread one of the photographs forward. It was a black and white image of a string quartet, dated 1913, taken in front of the Silver Pine Grand Hotel. The man standing second from the left was Callum Royce, or someone who looked exactly like him. Rayanne squinted. That's not possible. There's more, Mara said. She laid out another photo from 1948, a choir ensemble, and another from 1976, taken at a university recital, each time the same face, unchanged. Whoever Callum is, she whispered. "He's been part of this town's music scene for over a century. Quietly, subtly, always near those who vanished, always near the music." Rayan stepped back. "It's not him that's eternal. It's what's using him." That night, Rayan returned home with the notebook in hand. He hadn't told Kellen, but there was something he needed to try, alone. He locked the door behind him and turned off every light. A single candle flickered on the table beside the piano. He set the notebook down gently and began to play. Not from the notes on the page, there were none. He simply played what came to him, soft, slow, strange, melodies that didn't belong in this world. Music that felt like remembering a dream he never had. As the final chord echoed out, the room went cold, and a voice, soft and calm, spoke from behind him. "I knew you'd play it." Rayan turned, heart hammering. Callum Royce stood in the corner of the room. He looked exactly the same coat, same face, but his eyes glowed faintly, like candlelight trapped inside glass. "You're supposed to be sedated, locked up, watched," Callum finished. "But you of all people should know, some doors can't stay closed." Rayan raised his sidearm instinctively. Callum didn't flinch. "Shooting me won't help. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to explain." Rayan slowly lowered the gun. "Go on." Callum stepped forward. "The notebook isn't an object, it's a key. It finds people who are desperate enough to use it. Artists, composers, creators who've tasted failure or loss. It offers them beauty, immortality. In exchange, it feeds." Rayan's jaw tightened. "On what?" Callum's expression darkened. "Emotion, memory, souls. It creates music that stirs something ancient, something that's always existed beneath our world. You've heard its whisper. You felt it at the theater. The tremor in your spine when the wrong note sounds right." Rayan asked, "So what now? Is it still inside you?" Callum hesitated. "Not fully. It moves from vessel to vessel. I was its host for years. It used me to build the symphony, but you played it freely." Rayan took a step back. "No." "Yes," Callum said calmly. "You opened yourself, and it saw you." The candle extinguished on its own. The room went silent. Then the piano played a single note, on its own. Rayan's breath caught. Callum slowly backed away. "It's in you now, and it wants a final act." The next morning, Kellen awoke to find Rayan missing. No note, no call, just an open window and the black notebook gone. An emergency call came an hour later from the Silver Pine Cemetery. Funeral procession was being held, but no one could identify the deceased. No name on the casket, no family, just a single piano placed beside the grave, and Rayan, dressed in black, seated at the keys. Dozens gathered silently. As if called, Rayan looked calm, empty. He began to play, the same melody as before. A soft rain began to fall. Kellen arrived, breathless, pushing through the crowd. "Rayan!" Rayan didn't stop. His fingers moved gently, as if detached from thought, and then the wind shifted. The leaves stopped rustling. The crowd leaned in, entranced. Kellen grabbed Rayan's shoulder. "You don't have to do this." Rayan looked at him and smiled, not his usual smile, but someone else's. Kellen reached for the notebook lying beside the bench, but it burst into flames before he could touch it. Rayan's eyes glowed faintly. Then the piano fell silent. Rayan stood, stepped back, and collapsed, lifeless, gone. But the melody kept playing. No one touched the keys. No one moved. The final performance had begun. Epilogue Kellen quit the force the next week. He moved far from Silverpine into the deep quiet of the countryside. He never spoke of Rayan again, but sometimes at night when the rain begins to fall, he hears a piano playing in the distance, soft, slow, familiar, and each time a single word echoes in his mind: encore.